Creating clean cylindrical connections in Blender can be tricky, especially for sub-D modeling. One wrong move and you're stuck with pinching, shading errors, and warped cylindrical shapes. But these are some of the most common shapes you'll ever model. From machine parts to architectural details, they're a challenge that trips up even the most experienced artists. But don't worry, I got your back. I'm gonna give you a simple workflow to master even the trickiest connections with perfect topology. I'll even show you how to make the parts modular so you can build even more complex hard surface models with ease. What's going on, you 3D modeling beasts? This is JL Musi. I'm a professional 3D artist with experience both in film and video games. I've created educational content for companies like Autodesk, and my 3D software reviews have been featured in PC Mag. I've even presented my 3D workflows as SIGGRAPH. In this video, I'm going to show you how to master the 4 most common cylindrical intersections. Before we get started, join over 55,000 artists and download my free hard surface cheat sheets. This guide is packed with the pro workflows and topology secrets that took me decades to master. Grab your copy using the pinned comment down below. We're gonna start with the sharp elbow. We're gonna jump to the modeling layout. I'll hit A to select all the objects, hit delete, and now we are ready to begin. I'm gonna do Shift A. We're gonna start with a mesh and we will get a circle. On the options, I'll set this to 24. I'll hit 7 to jump to the top view, period, to zoom in, and I'm going to explain exactly why I'm using 24. This is a very common question on the initial subdivisions of a cylindrical shape. I'm going to hit Control Spacebar to maximize the 3D viewport. I'll hit Tab to dive into edit mode, F to fill this. I'm going to leave this as is. I'll do Shift D, G, X, move this over to the side. I'll get my 3D cursor. I'll move it over to the side as well. I'll do Shift A, I'll get another circle. This time, I'll set it to something like 15, dive into edit mode, hit fill. There's 2 main reasons why I'm using 24. The first one is when you have very light subdivisions on a cylindrical surface and you're trying to uphold a certain volume, it's very easy for that volume to get lost. That's why 24 is a sweet spot, especially since we don't have a lot of details carved in here. The second and more important reason is that 24 is divisible by 4, meaning that it's going to give us 6 slices per symmetry line. So if I go in here, for example, and I take these 2 verts, I'll hit J to join, you see that we have exactly 2 symmetry lines here. And when we're doing any type of hard surface modeling, thinking about those symmetry lines is very, very important. If we jump over here to our odd numbered one, you'll see that here, if I hit J, we kind of get a symmetry line, but it's not down the middle. And here we really don't have one. So what a lot of artists typically do is they start modeling maybe with a cylindrical cap that wasn't the right divisions. And then maybe throughout the process, they figure, you know what, I need a symmetry line. So they opt to do something like this and then maybe try to round this out. However, since these verts right here, I'm hitting period to zoom in, since these verts are a lot closer than this span here, you're going to get a lot of pinching and you're not going to get a uniform round surface. So if we go in here and we do Control 2 to add a sub-D modifier, you can see here towards the bottom, we get a little bit of wonkiness and a little bit of pinching. So this is not ideal. And that's why I like to start with 24 because it's divisible by 4 and it's going to give us those 2 critical symmetry lines that are very important for hard surface modeling. I'm going to delete both of these cylindrical caps. Now I'll hit period on the numpad to zoom in and frame on my object. I'll hit tab to dive into edit mode. I'm going to scale this down slightly like this. I'll make sure I have this face selected, hit 1 to jump to the front, E to extrude, and I'm going to extrude up like this. How I'm going to create these connections is I'm going to give them a little bit of extra detail, and I'm also going to connect the smaller inner pipe. That way I get a good idea of how these things are going to look connected. I'll do Control R. The first thing is I'm going to add a loop cut right about here and right about here. This is going to basically indicate that lip that I'm trying to create. I'll hit 3 to jump to my faces. If we do Alt and left click and select near this edge here, it's going to give us our loop of faces indicating the direction. From this point, I can go ahead and do Alt E. This is going to bring up our extrude options, and I'll do extrude faces along normal, and that way I can basically get a little bit of width on this lip. Now from here, what I want to do is select this loop of faces. So I'll select this face, Alt left click near this edge, and I don't want to extrude this. Now what I want to do is actually scale inward here. This is going to be that smaller pipe. Essentially what I'm doing here is creating a basic block out of this shape. Now if we hit S and we just basically start to scale, you see that we get the Z axis in play. We don't want that. So what I'm going to do is hit S, but this time I'll do Shift Z. This is going to leave the Z axes out of play. You'll see that I have my green and my red basically axis constraints, indicating that the Z is no longer here because I hit Shift Z along with the transform. And this works with any transform, not just scaling. So now I can scale in here. I'll do something like this. I'll jump to the front view by hitting 1. I'll hit S, Shift Z one more time, and maybe bring this in just a little bit more. Now it's time to get our angled cut. This is going to be a 90-degree elbow. There's a couple ways to do this. One popular way is using the knife tool. The other one is the shear. However, there is a better alternative here, and that's using a mirror modifier with a empty to basically give it that 45-degree cut. What we're going to do is I'm going to make sure that I'm in object mode. I'm going to hit F3. This way I can search for my modifier right here within the 3D viewport. I'll start typing in mirror, and we want to make sure that we're doing object modifier. This is a little bit different than actually doing it from the right-hand side where it just filters for modifiers. This gives you access to basically a lot more functions within Blender. I'll show you the alternative. If we do Control Spacebar and we do add modifier here and we type in mirror, these are only the modifier. So that has a built-in filter. We'll just do it this way, and now we have the modifier applied. Now, you'll notice on this modifier setting is we don't have a way of setting an angle, and this is where the empty comes into play. I'll do Shift A, we'll get an empty, we'll get a plane axis. I'll do Shift Z, and you see that it got plopped right here. That's because my 3D cursor was off in La La Land. However, we actually want to have the empty created here. So what I'll do is I'll delete this, and what I'll do is I'll select these top verts. I'll do Shift S, cursor to selected, hit 1, and now my empty is going to be generated right there in the middle. That's exactly what I want. I'll hit tab to jump to object mode, Shift A, empty, plane axes, and now my empty is right where it should be. I'll select my cylinder, I'll select the mirror object. We can pick it from the 3D viewport or from the outline. It really doesn't matter as long as it's selected. Now I want to make sure that it's rotated 45 degrees in the Y. So I'll do R, Y, 45, and there we go. Now you see this thing being rotated. I'll hit tab. We still got those top verts selected, so I'll do G, Z, and basically what I want to do is actually put this all the way up. Doesn't matter if we actually poke through a little bit, and you'll see why in a second. From this point, we want to enable bisect, and I'll go ahead and do Shift Z, and I'll also enable the wireframe option. I'll go to my viewport overlays and I'll enable the wireframe. Now I use this all the time, so I actually have this as a quick favorite. However, it needs to be in object mode. So I hit Q, you see that it's basically set up as a quick favorite, so I won't be going back to this option from the menus. I'll dive back into edit mode, and now I'll turn on bisect X, and now you see the magic happen here where it's actually cutting. And if you hover over bisect, you see that it actually tells you what it does. Cuts the mesh across the mirror plane, which is our empty set at 45. I'm going to hit 1, and I'm going to adjust this shape. And this is the beauty about this setup, is that it's working with modifiers. So any updates that we do, they're going to update on the mirrored part as well. So I think this looks pretty good. I'm going to select this face here, and we're going to delete this. We're actually going to use a solidify modifier to give it thickness in a little bit. So now we want to add some supporting loops to this to hold this shape. If we go in here in object mode, hit Control 2 to add a subdivision modifier, you'll see that it's starting to basically crumple. That's because we don't have any support loops. And my favorite way of doing this, especially when working through a mesh, is not actually baking it in with doing loop cuts or just beveling it with the bevel tool, is actually doing a bevel modifier and using the weight attribute to allocate those two edges that essentially become support loops. So what I'm going to do is hit tab to dive into edit mode. We're going to hide the sub-D modifier within edit mode, so I only see it in an object. I'm going to select this edge loop here. We're going to hit N to bring up the end panel, and we're going to put a mean bevel weight of 1 here under edge data. And you see now that it's highlighted this blue color. This means that it has a bevel weight. The next order of business is going to be to add a bevel modifier. So I'll add it from the right-hand side. Now, one thing you'll notice as soon as you drop this, Blender is trying to add a bevel modifier to every single edge by angle. We don't want that. The first thing that we'll do is actually scoot this up to be right in the middle. We don't want it to be at the very bottom. We always want that sub D modifier at the bottom of the stack. From this point, we want to tell Blender not to look at the angle, but look at the weight. As soon as we do that, the one edge that's selected now gets the bevel. Now we need to adjust this. So we'll go in here, we'll set this to 2, profile. We want this to 1, like this. And now we can play with the amount and you see the result that we're getting. This is exactly what we want. I'm going to add this edge here as well. I'll set the mean bevel weight to 1. And now you see that these additional edges are reinforced. I didn't do anything with this because I'm going to add a small little panel line. I'm going to do Control R, drop a small panel line here. We're going to select this loop of faces, hit 1 to jump to the front, Shift Z to go to wireframe E to extrude, and then we'll plop this up like this. Now it's very important here that you pay attention. We don't want to give this a bevel weight. Why? Because of the tolerances. If we were to add a bevel weight here, what's going to happen is it's going to cap this out and it's not going to give us enough range. And these bevels are going to be way too tight. And we're going to lose that nice little roll off and specular highlight because our bevels are too tight. But I'll show you what happens. The first thing that I want to do is I'm going to zoom in here close. Now you see that we have this loop of faces. We don't have to reselect those 2 edges. We can go to select loops and then we could do select boundary loop. And now you see that's converted to a boundary loop. If we zoom out here, pay attention to what happens to this bevel here once we add it. And I'm actually going to do Shift Z so you could get a good look. We're going to add those 2 edges that we had selected, hit 1, and you see that everything gets pinched. So if you're ever working with bevel weights and you add an edge and now you can't get rid of this very, very tight edge, this is the culprit. So what I'll do is I'm going to go back, zero this out. You see that now we get much more control because we don't have that tight tolerance that's clamping our bevels down. And what I'll do with this, I'll just add a manual bevel with the bevel tool. So I'll do Control B, give this a slight little bevel, 2 divisions, and then just make sure that the profile is set to 1. So now if we go to object mode, we do right click, we do shade smooth, we hit Q, hide the wireframe. See that we're starting to get a nice result. Now what I will do is switch this to my matte cap material. I'll set this to this brown. I'm also going to set this to cavity and the valley is going to be set to 0.75. Sometimes those values read pretty strong. I'm going to hit Q, bring up my wireframe, dive into edit mode. We notice that we actually don't have access to this edge right here. And that's because it's being created by the mirror modifier itself and not actual geometry. Any geometry created by a modifier, you're not going to be able to select it. So we actually have to apply this modifier. How I like to work is anytime that I have construction history, like a modifier, I like to save a backup state in a separate collection dedicated to history. That way, if I want to revert to it and find that modifier, it's accessible. You don't know how many times being able to access your modifiers will save you a lot of work versus if you just applied them with no backup. So what we'll do is this. First, we'll name this part. I'll go to object mode, Shift D, and duplicate it. So we'll do elbow sharp. This is going to be my backup piece. We'll select both of these. We'll hit M. We'll create a new collection, and this is going to be history. So now we can hide this, and we always have a backup with the mirror modifier so we can revert to it. From this point, I'll apply the mirror like this. And now if we dive into edit mode, we can select this edge, and now we can add the bevel weight to this as well. And if we go back to object mode, you see the result that we have, which looks pretty good. We'll dive back into edit mode and we're going to start finalizing this. So what I like to do is have even quad distribution. I don't like these gigantic spans right here without some loop cuts in between. If we actually hit tab, you'll see how much these edges are stretching because it's very, very light in there. So what I'll do is I'll do Control R, drop 2 loop cuts there, 2 loop cuts here, same thing here, 2 loop cuts here, and 2 loop cuts here. The final thing that I'll do is apply a solidify modifier to give this some thickness. So we'll go back to object mode, make sure this is selected. I'll do F3, solidify, and I'll move the solidify to happen before the sub D modifier. From this point, I'll start giving it some thickness like this. Now you see that we're losing a lot of volume here, and that's because we don't have any support loops. What we can do is, I really don't like to apply solidify modifiers early on in the modeling stage. Honestly, they actually kind of create some wonky geometry in there. And to be technical, if I really wanted to get in there and have maybe the camera fly through, I'd probably clean it up. For this, it's not going to be necessary. However, I don't want to bake that in. But what I want to do is actually just take advantage of the edge data parameters here that allow us to give a crease value to the actual thickness that it creates. So what we're going to do is we're going to set a 1 value here to the outer. I'm also going to set a 1 here at the crease inner, and you see that it gives me a value here. Now we have a little bit of wonky shading here. That's because of really that creasing. So what we can do is do right click, shade auto smooth, and you see that that shading got cleaned up quite a bit. We could also apply something with a little bit more specularity, like this red material, but this looks pretty good. I like to basically apply something with a little bit more specularity, and that really pushes your surfaces to be error-free. Sometimes when using those matte caps, it's easier to miss things, but when you add something like this red specular material, any pinching or any topology errors come really, really evident, especially when you have sub-D enabled. This video is brought to you by my course, The Blender Hard Surface Blueprint. Stop bouncing between random YouTube tutorials. This is the proven system that takes anyone, even a complete beginner, from a default cube to a finished portfolio-ready model. If you're serious about building production quality work, the link is in the description below. Next on the list is a round elbow. We're going to simply take the elbow sharp, do Shift D, right click, drop it here, rename this to round, hide the sharp one, dive into edit mode. I'm going to select this loop here, hit V to rip, right click. What hitting V on any loop actually disconnects those components. For example, now that we've selected that loop there, I can hit 3 to select any face, hit L, and now I'll be able to select length. And since this is a polygon island, or there it's limiting by that seam, which was created by the rip, we could basically take this, move this off, and you see the effect. So I'll do X, F, delete. For the time being, I don't want to be able to look at the solidify, so we'll kill that. Make sure that both of the loops are selected. We'll go to edge, bridge edge loops, and you see that it connects it as a straight line. We don't want that, so what I'll do is I'll bring up the number of cuts, and you see that Blender starts to essentially blend between these. I'm going to leave this at 8. I'll hit 1 to jump to the front view here. We could actually play with the smoothness here, and we could basically tweak that corner. We don't want this to be like this because we're going to get pinching there. And obviously one of the factors to these corners is how thick you made these cylindrical shapes. I'll hit tab to dive into object mode. We could enable the solidify modifier. Again, I'll switch over to my red matte cap, take a look, and I think this looks pretty good. I'm going to call this one done. Next on the list, we'll build our cross connector. Again, I'll start working off the sharp elbow, switch this back to my clay matte cap, select my elbow, Shift D, right click, rename this to cross, hide the visibility on the elbow, dive into edit mode. And if we pay attention here, this is already pretty much built for us. If I go into wireframe mode, disable the solidify, select my faces, I'm going to scoop these up here and these here, X, F to delete this. You see that we already have a fourth created. What I'll do here is I want to make sure that my origin is set right there, because the mirror modifier is going to work best off of this. So what I'll do is I already have my 3D cursor, but I'll go ahead and just move it off to the side just to show you. So I'll select this corner vert here, do Shift S, we'll do cursor to selected. Now you see that I have this hotkey to Shift Control S. So I'll call this out going forward, but I won't access it again. I'll just use my shortcut. So I'll do cursor to selected. Now we have our 3D cursor right there. And then I want to get the origin here as well. You see that the origin is here at the bottom. We don't want that. We want that origin right in the corner, as that's going to be the basis for the mirror modifier. I'll hit tab to dive into object mode. We'll go to set origin and we'll do origin to 3D cursor. Again, you see that I have this hotkey as Shift Control 3. So moving forward, I'll call it out, but I won't go back to the menu. Now you see the origin snap to the 3D cursor. I'll hit F3, I'll type in mirror, make sure that I'm on the modifiers filter. Now the mirror modifier is happening after the subdivision. We don't want that. So we'll bump this up. usually at the bottom of your stack should be your subdivision and any modifier affecting your normals. So we'll expand the mirror, enable the Z, also enable the solidify, Shift Z here, and let's see what we have going on. The issue is that we want the solidify to happen after the mirror. So if we move this, now you see that issue goes away. So understanding the order of your modifiers is extremely important. A lot of times it looks like you did everything wrong. You just shift these around and think about logically what steps you wanted to happen first. So we'll apply our red mat cap. We'll take a look. We'll enable our wireframe, and I'm going to call this one done. The last one on the list is the angled connector. This is going to be one of the more advanced junctions, especially because it contains an angle and also quite a bit of asymmetry. So let's get started. I'm going to work off the elbow round. So I'll bring this one back up. I'll do Shift D to duplicate it, right click to drop it. We can hide the round one. This is going to be our angled. I'll hit tab to dive in here. And what I want to do is disable the solidify on this. I'm going to grab this edge loop here, hit a V to basically rip it. I'll right click to drop it. 3 to select the face here, hit L for length, XF. Remember, V is going to rip, disconnect those components. L will allow us to select those link components, which if they're on a polygon island, it's going to grab. From this point, we're going to take this edge loop here and extrude up. So I'll do E to extrude, Z for axis constraint. Now, if you're working and that blue highlighting from the mean bevel weight is getting essentially in the way, we could actually disable it for the time being. So we're going to go here to the mesh edit mode overlays. We'll take off bevel. And now you see that you could easily see your selections. Sometimes these color coding on these components can get in the way of your selections. I'll hit 1 to go back to the front, Shift Z to go to wireframe, GZ, and basically move this up right here. Now, previously, what we've been doing is using a mirror modifier to basically get some symmetry. We could actually do it directly on the mesh, bypassing the mirror modifier. Sometimes that's quicker, especially because we save the step of having to apply the modifier itself. So what we'll do is we're going to go to the snapping menu here, and I'm also going to show you a different way of moving our origin. So we'll go to closest vertex, we'll enable snapping, we'll go to object mode. Blender, in one of the more newer releases, enabled the ability to move the origin directly. We could do that while being in object mode. We do control period, and now you see that we get this gizmo. This gizmo allows us to move the origin directly without having to go through something like the 3D cursor. I'll do GZ, constraint to the Z axis, wiggle over one of these verts. Since we have vert snap enabled, it's going to snap right there. We're going to do control period to set the origin, and now we're ready to apply our symmetry. We'll dive back into edit mode, hit A for all to select the components that we want to basically symmetrize. We'll go to mesh and we'll do symmetrize. And you see that since we're working in the Z, we just have to make sure Z minus to Z plus is enabled, and that's exactly what we want. Something I'm noticing here is that we're getting this, basically these two edges. And that's actually a result of the bevel modifier. If we disable the modifier, we could tell that's the bevel modifier. So what we need to do, remember that was actually on the corner, so that was fine, but now this is an interior edge. We have to basically remove this. So I'll go in here and select this loop, and you see that we have a mean bevel weight. So I'll hit 0 here, and that's going to clear out that bevel in the middle. From this point, we want to go ahead and duplicate this. This is going to become the cutter that's going to connect at an angle to create this final shape. So what I need to do is do Shift D, right click, drop. I'm going to disable the snapping. I'm also going to hide the angled one. And what I'll want to do here is actually hit tab. I'm going to add a loop cut right here, pretty high on the piece. Hit V to rip, right click to drop. Basically, I'll select this face, hit L for length, X, F. And now we clear that out. Remember, hitting V will disconnect the components. And then anytime that you select one component, hit L for length, it's going to pick up that polygon island. So from this point, we have our cutter. Now, Blender's pretty good with the booleans. However, I do like to help it out a little bit and create a watertight mesh. So what I'll do here is basically hit F to fill this and also select this loop here, hit F to fill this, and this looks good. From this point, we need to bring back our angled piece, like so, and I'm actually going to rename this to cutter. And on the cutter, we don't need the solidify, we don't need the subdivision, and just to avoid any issues, I'm actually going to kill the bevel as well, like this. So I'm just going to have a simple polygonal object here. Now I'm going to hit 1 to jump to the front view, R to rotate it, and I want to constrain this to the Y. So I'll do something like this and basically just get the angle that I want. I don't think I want to go as extreme as 45. I'll do G, Y, kind of move this down. I don't want this gigantic connector, however, I don't want it to clip basically that lip. So I'll do something like this. R, Y, again, maybe drop the angle a little bit more. I think I'm pretty happy with this. I'm going to hit N to hide the end panel, control space bar to maximize this. This is a relatively simple shape, and seeing the fact that it's the same radius and the same divisions on a cylinder actually helps. But if you're doing more complex shapes, always take the little bit of time, especially with working with booleans, before you connect it, that your edges match up. You see that these edges actually match up pretty well. So when we apply the bevel modifier and try to start merging these verts, we're going to get a clean sub-D result. The last thing that you want to do is randomly slap shapes together, especially when doing sub-D modeling, and not have a good idea of how these are going to connect. Remember, it's a lot easier to add loop cuts or do any type of matching up now versus when you apply the bevel modifier. So this looks pretty good. However, this shape here is a little bit tall, so I'll do Shift Z and then I'll select all these verts, G, Y, bring this down right about here. I'm going to take this piece here and I'm going to move it a little bit closer. So I think this looks pretty good. What I'm going to do is actually go in this piece, Shift Z, and I'm actually going to kill this loop altogether. So I'll select it, Control Delete, Shift Z, and I want this to be as clean as possible right here in the middle. I'm also going to select this piece here and delete this edge, doing Control Delete. So I want this to be pretty relatively light. Something that I also want to do is let's hide the sub-D modifier for the time being. Anytime that you apply it, those edges can droop down and confuse you. So we don't want them at all during this part of the process. This looks pretty good. So I'm going to take this piece here, hit F3, find a Boolean modifier, add it. We want to make sure that it happens before the subdivision. We'll select our picker, we'll select this piece here, and we'll do a union. So what I'll do is I'll hide the cutter, and that's the result that we get. Pretty clean, but we will have to do some cleanup, which is pretty much expected when you do a Boolean's workflow, especially when you're trying to get a clean sub-D result. Since we're going to have to apply the Boolean modifier, this is a good time to create a backup of the cutter and also this angled piece, send it to the history, just in case we want to adjust the angle or maybe even do a different Boolean operation altogether. I'll take this piece, Shift D, right click to duplicate it and drop it. I'll do backup here, and the cutter will be a backup as well. So basically, since we're going to bake down the Boolean, we don't have to create a backup of the cutter. So I'll select both of these here, hit M, we'll drop this over to the history, and now we're basically just left with this angled piece that has the Boolean modifier. I'll go ahead and apply it. So let's begin the cleanup process. I'm going to take these edges here like this. I'll hit V, right click to rip these, select one face, L for length, XF. We're going to gut this out like this. Anytime that I do a Boolean's modifier, I like to select all my verts. Hit M for merge. We'll do by distance. And it looks like it removed no verts. That's actually a very good sign, meaning that we got a pretty clean Boolean operation. So let's go ahead and actually scale these down flat to basically close this gap. Now, with the scale tool, we could scale flat. But what we want to do is actually scale flat from an active component, which essentially is going to be the pivot of that scaling operation. So what I can do is select one vert here, select this entire loop, hit 1 to jump to the side, and then I'll hit 1. This is going to convert it over to verts, and I'm just going to deselect this vert and then reselect it. We're going to hit period here, and we're going to switch this to active element. Essentially, this is going to be the pivot for our scale. I'll do SZ0. And you see that it scaled it right there flat based on that vert's height. I'll hit enter to drop that. I'll hit M, and then we'll do by distance, and these verts are now merged. I'll select these edges here, hit N, add this to my mean bevel weight. We'll do Control R, add 2 loop cuts here, 2 loop cuts here. I'm going to do Control R, drop some loop cuts here, and essentially I added these loop cuts to get even quad distribution. That way we don't have these edges shooting up and down because we have a very large span. So if you squint your eyes, they're making these little more condensed square faces. Now we do have these gigantic caps here. I'll need to delete this one, XF delete. This looks pretty good. Now we could return to object mode, enable the solidify modifier, and I'm gonna call this one finished. I'm pretty happy with the result. If you wanted to have further control of this thickness here, you would apply the solidify modifier, and then you would basically take those hard edges and add them to the bevel weight to be controlled by the bevel modifier. However, I'm happy with this, as for my finished model, you're not going to see these, as these pipes are actually going to be connecting together. And here's my entire modular pipe system with the workflow that you just learned. And that wraps up the video. Don't forget to download the hard surface cheat sheets. It's packed with the same production level workflows that I've used in the last 2 decades to build professional hard surface models. Grab your copy using the pinned comment down below. As you level up as a 3D artist, remember that's only one part of who you are. Pour your love not just into your art, but also into the people around you. So congratulations, you just leveled up. You now have pro level techniques for creating perfect hard surface cylindrical connections in Blender. Mastering specific shapes like this is crucial, but what if you want to accelerate your entire 3D modeling skill set? The next step is to learn the universal principles of modeling. What if I could take 20 years of professional secrets and compress them into the next 20 minutes? That is what my next video is all about. In it, I'll give you not just Blender tools and shortcuts, but actionable workflows the pros use to build any clean production ready model. You can check out that video right here.